My word for this year has been harmony, and how serendipitous that Equilibria, a woman-owned wellness brand, focuses on bringing your mind and body back into harmony. Equilibria offers science-backed products that have helped over 200,000 women feel better. My go-to product is a daily Nutri-Greens, which contains an immune antioxidant and detox blend, along with prebiotics, probiotics, and over 35 fruits and veggies. They support digestion, boost the immune system, boost mood and energy levels, and helps detoxify the body. Admittedly, I'm not the best at reaching my recommended quota of veggies every day, but the daily Nutri-Greens makes it so much easier to reach that goal. Plus, it tastes great, and I feel an immediate energy boost after. This is my travel hack of the year, which is taking daily Nutri-Greens on the road with me so I can get my daily dose of greens even if I'm not home. Now, for our Dateable listeners only, head to myeq.com and use the code DATEABLE for 15% off Equilibria's daily Nutri-Greens and much more. That's myeq.com and use the code DATEABLE at checkout for 15% off site-wide today. Hi, I'm Yue Xu.
And I'm Julie Kraftchick.
We're active daters turned dating sociologists.
Here to dive into everything modern dating and relationships.
Welcome to the Dateable Podcast. Hello, friends.
Welcome back to Dateable.
We are in our on, off season. Or we can call this a situationship season.
Oh my God. What are
Just
we?
kind of in the middle.
Yeah.
What are we doing?
Are we or aren't we?
we haven't defined what this is. What is the season that we're in? Well, we're in a season. It's just not the season, but we are in a season, which is the off-on season in between our official seasons. If that's not confusing, I don't know what it is.
You know, this is the most ambiguous situationship, though, that I think is actually kind of fun. It's intriguing. What's around the corner? We don't know. For anyone that may have come in new, welcome, first of all, if that's you. But also, we had 2 re-releases of some episodes the last couple weeks. We had a re-air of our expose with Ashley Madison with an updated intro that was about, you know, the whole documentary that's on Netflix right now. So we had some new takes on it, but also our most controversial guest to date, Leon, was last week with his PSA to women. And if you didn't listen to that one yet, go back, listen. But we did run a poll on Spotify, and the whole thing with Leon is he's giving this PSA to women to share kind of the shitty behavior that men do holistically. And we are obviously calling BS that it's not all men. And there was the poll question of like, do you know people like Leon? Like, yes, maybe on the DL, or absolutely not. And a lot of people were like, maybe we do. And we just don't know it.
Right. Could be your neighbor. Could be your friend. Could be your colleague.
I mean, I certainly have guy friends that I would never date or introduce to friends.
True. Yep. I don't have guy friends who work that hard at tricking women.
No. I don't either.
I think most of my guy friends are too lazy to think that hard.
That was next level. But I still have guy friends that I still wouldn't be like, sure, you know?
Yeah, right. I mean, a lot of them have a seed planted in them that just needs a little watering, and then they become full Leons. But most of them are dormant.
I thought you were going to say a seed to make them dateable, but...
No.
Seed to be Leon.
No. Everybody has 2 seeds, a seed to make them dateable, a seed to make them a Leon. And it's just how you water it. You could go one or the other way.
Everyone is dateable. We still stand by that, but you got to take care of your seeds.
You got to water your fucking dateable seed. Just know where that seed is.
Sounds so weird.
Don't spread the seed. Just water the seed. The right one.
Oh my God.
But yes, we are re-airing another episode for this one, and it's one of our most popular, or
most popular, the number 1 episode we've ever run on Dateable.
Wow.
This is a pretty big, it's an award here.
Yes, it deserves a trophy, the science of attraction, which is the science behind why you're attracted to people and how do you explain your attraction towards people?
And we go into like, our types and how accurate that is with the science, and makes sense why this one's popular because we know you all listeners love the science behind things.
Yeah.
And of course, attraction is one of those ones like we're always like, why are we attracted to this person, but not this person? Or we think they're attractive, but we're not attracted. That's always been like a big differentiator.
Yes. And what you'll take away from this episode is how you can reframe attraction in general. You'll understand that your brain is there to process, but it's not all knowing. We treat our brains like it's all knowing, like this is definitive. I'm definitely attracted to this person or this type. After this episode, you'll kind of question that and think about what's the best way to use all that information in my brain.
Yeah. And, we're also going to link in the show notes an episode that Yue and I did as a solo that does reference this episode too, but it's expanding your type. So if you want to go in even deeper, you can also do that as a follow-on. But Dr. Paul Eastwick, he is our guest today. I had the pleasure of actually being on a podcast with him. I'm not sure how I was a co-guest with him, but they found me somehow, like the California Groundbreakers Association, to talk about dating in COVID. No idea, but I'll take it. I'll be at the same level as Dr. Eastwick.
Dr. Craft Chick, Dr. Eastwick.
I have a lot more schooling to go to if I'm going to be
both
that.
Have icks. You both have icks in your name.
That's how they found me.
The Dr. Icks.
They Googled Dr. Paul Eastwick and like somehow I came up and they're like, oh, let's get her on too.
It rhymes. Her name rhymes. It makes perfect sense.
It's funny. I never thought about that.
No, I think it makes total sense. They need to balance out the science with some real life examples,
the art,
and experiences. The art. Yes, you're the artiste.
Exactly.
But it's such a fun episode. I need to re-listen to it again because I've told Julie this many times. There are parts I did not understand. I had to rethink about and reprocess in my head. It's going to be one of those like, you're going to have to wrap your head around it.
I didn't struggle as much. And I'm not saying...
You did it.
I feel like we had this conversation a few times, and I'm saying this not to like be like, oh, I'm so much smarter than you, UA. I'm not trying to say that. But I'm saying is like some people might really be like, oh yeah, this makes sense.
Yes.
And other people might need to listen a couple times. And there's nothing wrong with either one. There's a lot of stuff that you process heck of a lot faster than I do. So it just depends on the content and the info and how you pick it up.
And the only reason we found this out was because of a big announcement we have coming up next week, where we had to apply these learnings to this big thing that we've been working on. And I remember just like back and forth text with Julie. Like in theory, it made sense. But then when I tried to apply it to a real life example, I'm like, what does this mean? So yes, that's how we found out. It was a very recent example.
But we got there. And, I think in general, like this episode, I think was game changing the way I looked at things. And I thought it was really insightful. So I'm excited that we're re-airing it for all the new Dateables, or even if you've been with us for a while and you maybe just want to listen again.
Re-listen. Do it. Maybe that's why it's our top episode. It's because people have to re-listen to it a few times, to grasp everything. Or it was just me and I re-listened to it 1,000 times for this big announcement that we have coming up next week. What could this be?
Well, I think in general, one of our other episodes that was at the top was the episode of how you're wired for relationships. We'll also link that one because I think it kind of goes hand in hand also. And that was the one we did with Dr. Abigail Lev about schemas.
Yeah.
They're just meatier, right? Like they're meatier topics, and we love to balance it out at Dateable. We have comedians, we have, fetishes, we have all the sorts. Like we have the gamut of topics that maybe, aren't as complex sometimes, although fetishes can be complex.
Oh, I tangent here. Our most watched video on YouTube is about diaper fetish. Okay, the diaper fetish episode. And we get comments all the time, like other people in the diaper fetish industry or community industry. I'm sure there's an industry, but community as well. And the most recent comment, did you see what someone wrote?
I don't think I did.
Someone just wrote, like, I think it came out yesterday. Someone just wrote, I don't get it. Like that was their comment. And I'm like, yeah, dude, like, thank you. Thank you for representing many people who also don't get it. I think that's a complexity of fetishes. I think we need both sides. We need the advocates and we need people who are like, I just don't fucking get it.
I mean, this is what's kept Dateable going for 8 years, though, right? We could talk about the science of attraction on one hand and then diaper fetishes on the other.
The science of diaper fetish. That will be our next one.
We should do it. We should do it. But speaking of things I want to ask about, this is actually technically the first time Yue and I have caught up since her big solo trip. We've obviously been talking through text nonstop, but you flew back yesterday and now we're recording. And now you're about to fly off again. So
yes.
I was like, I'm not going to ask you anything till we get on the air. Just do it.
I know my brain is still processing what has happened the last 2 weeks because I went on this spiritual journey. I swear I sat like a spiritual awakening and I realized I have a lot to work on. There's a lot of blockages in me that I have finally admitted to and observed and embraced that I need to work through. But I'll start with, I started my trip in Helsinki. In Finland, I didn't know anything about the city except that it gets really cold in the winter. That's what you think of Finland, and also where Santa Claus lives some of the time. The week that I was there, I was deeply entrenched in local culture because I stayed outside the city center, outside of the tourist areas. I specifically stayed in a place that was close to all the tennis clubs because my goal was to play tennis every day in Finland, which happened 7 days.
Okay.
Played tennis every day. It was amazing. But I was able to meet a lot of the locals and I was very curious about how they date, how they view love, how they see the world. Because the Finns are known to be very stoic and they're known to be very private to themselves and they are not open. They're like, they don't really allow other people in as easily. They're not expressive people. So obviously I'm like, how do people date? And many of the locals told me that divorce rates are low, but so are marriage rates. Because they have this mentality of try it before you buy it mentality.
Interesting.
So many of the couples, they live together, they have kids. And if that works for 2 or 3 years, then they decide to get married. And those marriages do last. But many decide that after 2 or 3 years, they part ways and they co-parent. So you see a lot of co-parenting in Finland and it's living apart, but making it work. And some people, like I met one guy who has 3 different kids from 3 different women and he co-parents with all 3 of them and they make it work. It's just
fascinating.
It's very much accepted and they truly believe in monogamy. They truly believe in dating one person at a time. We've heard this from multiple people. Like America is like the only country where you date multiple people at once. It's like a thing. But anywhere else in the world, they're like, no, one person at a time. And it takes a lot to get to know someone. But their culture is based around saunas. So there's like 5 point some million people in Finland and 3.5 million saunas. So there's such a huge sauna culture. And Julie, it is completely naked. That is the traditional thing, like co-ed naked. So the only times that they really come out of their shell is when they're in the sauna naked with their colleagues or friends or family.
Interesting.
So some of them, like for a date, after a while, would go to a sauna with someone.
Okay, after a while.
After a while, yes. And that's when they open up. They don't see it as a sexual thing. It's just more like time to really get to know each other. But they have no qualms about like being naked with like in a co-ed environment.
Very interesting.
I know. So that was the highlight in Finland, which I fell in love with the city. I absolutely love it. Some people call it the Japan of Europe. It's very clean, orderly. It's quiet. People are very to themselves and, it's just everything works there. It's very modern as well. Then I went to Tallinn, Estonia for a week for a self-development conference called Mind Valley, which is like borderline cult. I told people because they teach stuff like hypnosis.
Yeah, it's very woo-woo.
It's very woo-woo, like somatic healing and, Kundalini yoga. There's that. But then they have this other facet of the conference, which was AI. So like teaching us AI tools and then leadership. So like how to show up for your team, how to show up for your business partners. So it had everything I ever wanted. It was like
in one
combination.
conference. Yeah.
Yes. To me, it was like South by Southwest plus Burning Man plus yoga retreat in one, which is like, I never thought something like this would exist. But yes, it is borderline culty. And I remember someone asked me, like, it was day 2 of the conference, and someone asked me, like, what's this conference like? And I said, it's where the hat people go. I don't know if you get this reference, Julie, but do you know those like wide flat brim hats that these woo-woo people wear? Like
No, this must be an
oh,
LA
okay.
thing.
Like they're wearing the feather earrings and like these
Oh, yeah.
you know,
I think
like
I know what
these,
you're saying now.
like
Yes.
these Burning Man, the hat people, and they wear them indoors. And you're like, why do you need a hat indoors? But they do. It's part of their look. It's the hat people culture. But I do admire a certain part of this because, and I told Julie this, my first event was a non-sexual intimacy workshop. I did not know what to expect. I cried my eyes out. I never bawled so much in my life. And all we were doing was just staring into strangers' eyes. That was it. But something about just being so exposed for a minute with a stranger who can fully see you. You can't hide. You can't divert your gaze. It's shocking. It like shocked my system to be so exposed with someone. And to maintain eye contact with someone you don't know for that long brought out a lot out of me, where it was like hurt and trauma and just a lot of repressed memories and feelings.
Wow.
That I realized I had been diverting into, converting it to different kinds of energy that wasn't inward. It was external. So that was my first session. I got there Sunday. That was my first session. And for the rest of the week, I cried every day. And
it's so wild because you're not a crier.
I'm not a crier.
I think the only time I've ever heard you cry was like on that solo episode you did.
Yes, that was the only one. Maybe that was the beginning of this whole journey. But it was validating because I was at one of the talks and the person was like, I understand this is a conference where everybody goes home to their hotel rooms to cry. So I was like, okay, I'm not the only one, because it brings so much out. I don't know exactly what the science is behind it all, but when you're forced to go in and there's absolutely nothing distracting you, a lot comes up. A lot of memories and feelings that you're like, oh, I didn't even know I was capable of feeling this way. A lot of that comes up. And there was this one powerful workshop where it was like there was a lot of dancing in all of this. Like every session started either with a dance or a meditation. That's like how woo-woo it was. But we had one session that was like dancing. And at the end, you had to think of someone that you are wanting to forgive. And you go up to a stranger and you treat the stranger like the person you want to forgive. And they put on this extremely emotional song and people were sobbing in front of a stranger, like heads down, just, I forgive you. It was so powerful. And to me, like, I don't even know if there's someone I want to forgive, but I felt like the sorrow in the room and it made me extremely emotional just to be amongst that. And to also understand, this is what applies to dating, is that everyone is fucking working through something. Everyone is.
100%.
And it manifests in different ways, right?
I mean, I have so many questions that I feel like we might need like a whole episode on this. But like, I have so many questions. Like, okay, I guess just keep it quick. It was just in looking in your eye exercise, or was there more to it?
The non-sexual intimacy workshop started like this. Women were in one room, men were in one room. And for a minute at a time, you find a new stranger and you look in their eyes for a minute, okay? And then you change. So that was like one of the exercises. And you work up to the last exercise, which is you face a stranger and you hug them for a minute like you would a really good friend. That wasn't as emotional for me because there was no eye contact. I think I can hug people and that feels good, but doesn't bring out emotions. And then they bring the men into the room. So now it's a practice of how do hetero people be in the same room and experience this intimate environment without it being sexual. So staring into the eyes of the men and see what comes up for you. And we had to be very non-judgmental if like some guy got an erection or,
Oh,
there was a
wow.
lot of that. There was a lot of rules around this. But it felt like an intimate, safe space where we were able to explore and just like fuck up if we needed to. But I will tell you, the men were very uncomfortable.
Interesting.
Very. I did not have one man that can hold my gaze for the entire minute.
I mean, I've never I've done some of that, like in like the what was it, like the 27 questions?
Yeah.
Was that the right
To fall in
one?
love.
Yeah,
Yes.
I
20
forget
something questions to fall
something,
in love.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I remember it being like hard and uncomfortable, but for me, I didn't have this feeling of like crying.
Yeah.
I'm curious like what you thought it was that brought that on. Like I'm sure the environment was different too.
I think it's like, okay, when you look into the eyes of a stranger, I saw everybody go through this. First, it was a little bit of amusement. So you just from the eyes, and we were only staring into one eye.
Oh, interesting.
Okay, so you just pick one eye, you stare into it. First, it starts out as amusement, so the eyes widen. And then they get a little smaller because there's a little curiosity now. And then they get really small because there's fear. Oh my God, everybody has so much fear in their eyes. You can just see it, you can sense it. And then that fear gets turned into like awakening, like, okay, wait, we're okay. We're okay. We made it through that. And then it goes into like you can tell if someone's experiencing hurt. You can tell if someone's experiencing something more traumatic that comes out at the end. So I think the hurt for me came out at the very end. I don't know. I cannot pinpoint where the root of the hurt is, but I was truly hurting. And I had a woman come up to me later and she's like, you are going through some stuff right now. She didn't know who I was, didn't know my name.
Wow.
But she's like, you are going through some stuff right now. And this is a great time for you to work through it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Do you think it went deeper than like even the stuff last year with your ex?
Oh, I think so.
Yeah.
I think it's a lot of existential questions of like, who am I? What am I? What am I doing on earth? A lot of these bigger questions.
Yeah.
And then there's the only child kind of guilt with my parents that come up year after year. And my biggest fear is losing my parents. Like it's the preemptive grief that I feel brings me a lot of hurt. So I know this is like beyond the cheating and beyond the boyfriends. Like this is a much bigger thing I'm working through. Probably since I was a child. I just never really took the time to be intentional about it.
I mean, I think some of it is like our age too. Like, because I just turned 41 birthday. And I feel like I've kind of had like, I mean, I had a great birthday celebration. I don't want to say that, but I've also kind of been, it's like every birthday is kind of like a reflection of are you where you want to be in life. And I think that's the stuff that gives me anxiety and kind of similar to you of like existential crisis of like, what am I supposed to be doing? Am I ever going to have the stuff I want? All of that. Some of it is probably, I mean, we're not midlife yet, but like we're getting there, like,
I mean, technically we are.
Yeah, maybe it is midlife, like there's something there, I think, that is maybe bringing some of this stuff up a bit.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. And I think we've spent the first half of our lives doing, and then now the second half of our lives reflecting.
Yeah.
And the reflection can come with a lot of emotions.
I do think, though, everyone has it. It's just like, are you willing to go there or not?
I know.
Like what you were saying earlier of like that you realize there's like a lot of stuff that you have built up. I think everyone has it.
Yeah.
But most people just don't want to touch it.
Or maybe you don't know how to access it, because I never knew how you access it. I wanted to cry. After the breakup last year, I wanted to cry. I couldn't do it.
Oh my God, you're going to become
I might become a crier, and I'd be okay with that because I think I'm able to access it. Like throughout this conference, different things triggered tears in me. It was just like so random. Someone would say something so fucking random and I'd be like, oh my God, I know. It's very strange. But then I was also able to access like a really joyful, blissful side of me. So I think I'm just accessing a deeper set of emotions I did not know existed.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like this solo trip was very fruitful in the sense of like, emotional awakening.
It was an emotional awakening. It was definitely an emotional awakening. Like maybe I'm in a cult now, but if I am, then maybe I know why. I know why people join cults.
So if I see suspect behavior, I know where to trace it back to.
I know. My goodness. But yeah, anyway. But how was your birthday? You had a crazy dinner, like an intense
Oh my
dinner.
God, I did. It was 18 courses.
Like, I can't even fathom.
They're all like tiny though.
Did you keep track? Like, were you counting?
Yeah,
Wow.
because we were like taking photos. My partner and I like we could be foodies.
You are foodies. You can't.
We are foodies.
You're not just could. You are.
Yeah, this place I really wanted to go to, and he booked a reservation like on the dot. Like when they opened, it was, he was like ready, pouncing on it. And then for some reason, the only day they had available was my actual birthday, which fell on a Tuesday. And we're like, that's kind of weird because it's like popular, but not that popular. Like on the minute, it'll be like completely booked up. We're like, yeah, let's just do it. Might as well. Yeah. Why not? And then he went back like 10 minutes later and like everything was open. I think they just had like a system malfunction.
But it worked out because it was your birthday.
It worked out. And I think we got a lower rate. I think they like had a whole system issue
of
like their old stuff. They like upped the rate. So it was great though. I think overall it was a pretty low key birthday. It wasn't like last year where I celebrated for legit 2 weeks straight. I was like, okay, I'm going to do it on Tuesday. Yeah. And we're moving forward.
Yep. Well, welcome to officially like into your 40s.
Over 40. Yeah, exactly. I think the 40 one you could get behind because you're like, that's a big milestone. This one, I'm like,
I know.
Here I am.
And then you just like lose track after that. Like, I'm in my 40s. That's all I know.
It's okay. I know this will pass. I feel like around my birthday a lot this happens to me.
Really?
I think a lot of people can relate to this. Like I've talked to friends about this. Maybe listeners out there could relate. I think it's just like a point of reflection.
Mm-hmm.
I put my birthday on that. More than even like the start of the new year for me. It's always like my birthday signifies like the next year.
Well, I understand a lot of the pressures around, am I where I'm supposed to be?
Yeah.
Did I reach the goals I set out for myself? But there was a talk I went to at the cult, and the guy had such an interesting reflection question for everybody. And he said he was someone who had everything. He had a family, kids, money, fame, fortune, everything. And he had a personal revolution where he was like, I have sacrificed a lot to get these things I thought I wanted, yet I still wasn't happy. You hear this a lot from people, right? So his reflection period, what he got from his like soul journey was that we spend so much time thinking acquiring something was the positive when actually losing something should be the positive.
Interesting.
Because you're already enough. Like if the baseline is you are enough, anything else you add is at the sacrifice of you, something authentic to you. But anything you lose from at the baseline of you're already enough, no matter what, whatever you shed is whatever is not authentic to you or what's not serving you.
Interesting.
So, yes.
It's a good way to look at it.
He said, we need to celebrate the losses because the losses are you're shedding what's not you.
Yeah.
So I thought that was like a kind of a Buddhist Zen way of thinking about birthdays too. It's like, all right, let's celebrate what I got rid of this year.
No, it's definitely a good exercise for myself and anyone out there that might be, focusing on the milestones and what to achieve and all that. Like it's a good way to rethink it.
Yeah.
I think we can end it there, but we have a whole episode. I think we need to do a science of intimacy is what I'm learning from this.
We should. And all we do is just have people stare into each other. Like find a stranger on the street and stare into their eyes.
I want to hear like why it's so powerful.
I know.
Because it's like, I can see like it clearly brought stuff up for you and the people that were in that room.
Yes.
But I want to understand it more. But anyways, for now, we will focus on attraction. We'll save that for another day as we have an expert ready to talk to us about the science of attraction.
Paul's been waiting. Yeah. Put me in, coach.
I do love about Paul, he has an attraction lab.
I know.
So we need to do an intimacy lab as well.
Oh, yes. Sounds like a sex cult, but yes.
It does. That sounds, attraction lab does not sound that way. Intimacy, yes.
Nope.
Okay. Well, before we go into it, like Yue alluded to, we have a really big announcement next week. So make sure to tune into the episode. And if you're not already following us on socials at Dateable Podcast, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube.
Everywhere.
You could find us, but then also make sure to join our mailing list. You can go to our website. We've been updating it with some articles and a lot more robust information outside of just the podcast. Of course, you can find our courses there. We still have Meeting People IRL open all summer. So if you're thinking about attraction, maybe you'll be inspired to take that next step and also take a look at that masterclass that we have.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, before we get into it, let's hear a message from our sponsors. Okay, let's hear from Dr. Eastwick about the science of attraction.
What does attraction even mean? We're going to get into that on this episode with our very special guest, Dr. Paul Eastwick. He's a professor at UC. I was going to say the UC. He's a professor at UC Davis. He's the UC professor. He runs the Attraction and Relationship Research Lab, where he uses scientific approaches to understand how people form and maintain relationships, especially when it comes to attraction. Whoa. That's a lot.
So excited for this. I am so excited to talk about our partner, Osea. You've probably heard me raving about this product, but I seriously cannot get enough. Feels like I'm having a spa day in my home every time I use their Undaria algae body oil. I love how it visibly firms my skin and leaves it feeling silky, soft, and unbelievably glowing. And it's the smell too. It just makes me feel like I'm at the spa because it smells like summer, bottled with all natural, uplifting notes of mango, mandarin, grapefruit, lime, and cypress. I also love that with Osea, I never have to choose between my values and my best skin because it's all vegan and cruelty-free, and also mother and daughter founded. Get healthy, glowing skin for summer with clean vegan skin and body care from Osea. Get 10% off your first order site-wide with code DATEABLE at OseaMalibu.com. You'll get free samples with every order and free shipping for orders over $60. Head to OSEAMalibu.com and use the code DATEABLE for 10% off.
Yay, it's summer, my favorite season. And you know what can make summer even better? Via hemp products. Need to chill out after a long day in the sun? There's a Via gummy for that. Dealing with anxiety or stress with summer travels? There's a gummy for that. Want to set the mood in the bedroom? There's a gummy for that. And that is actually my favorite gummy from Via. I'm talking about their best-selling High Love Gummy, a unique blend of pleasure-enhancing cannabinoids, libido-strengthening herbs, and a medium dose of THC all into one mind-blowing gummy that will awaken your senses, increase blood flow, and intensify any sexual experience. I know it's meant for sexy time, but here's a little trick for you. I actually just love taking it for some of my longer walks. It makes all my surroundings look, smell, and feel so nice. And if THC is not your thing, Via also offers a wide array of THC-free gummies. Whatever you want to be in the mood for, Via has something for you. If you're over 21 years of age, you can get 15% off plus a free pack of award-winning gummies with our exclusive code DATEABLE at viahemp.com. That's spelled VIIAHEMP.com. And don't forget to use the code DATEABLE to get 15% off and a free pack of their award-winning gummies.
Yeah.
And
nice
how
work.
we found Paul was a really great story. Paul and Julie were both on the California Groundbreakers podcast together. And as soon as Julie finished recording that podcast, she texted me and was like, we need Paul on our podcast.
True story.
True story.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I'm excited.
Thank you for being here. So who is Paul? He is 42 years old. He lives in Sacramento. He's been there for 5 years, originally from Massachusetts, just like Julie. And he is currently in a monogamous relationship. Before we get into everything you've learned from the Attraction and Relationship Research Lab, what exactly is an Attraction and Relationship Research Lab?
Well, that's a great question. So I am a social psychologist by training. And so what that means is that I use a variety of experimental, correlational, but mostly data-driven approaches to try to get a better handle on the way that people initiate and maintain relationships. Sometimes that means bringing people into the laboratory and having them meet a real or fictitious other person to get a sense of how they might react in terms of their romantic interest levels. Sometimes we track people's romantic interests over time. And sometimes we actually look at people who are currently in a relationship to try to get a sense of how those relationships are going. So that gives you a sense of the kinds of approaches we use to try to better understand relationships.
Interesting. So is it mostly qualitative, like research, or do you ever do like quantitative studies that are more, for anyone unfamiliar with research techniques, it's more in-depth conversations versus more survey style or mass looks at the population?
So usually we do quantitative research,
meaning
that we're collecting data and we're going to analyze numbers and we're going to use statistics in some way, shape, or form to make generalizations about sort of what those numbers mean. Sometimes we use a little bit in the realm of qualitative approaches. Sometimes you'll have videos. We're doing a coding project right now. One of my grad students, Alexa, is doing a coding project where she's coding couples talking about their narratives about how they got together in the first place. So that's very rich qualitative data, but as a quantitative psychologist by training, my instinct is usually, okay, let's somehow find a way to put numbers on this stuff that people are talking about so we can analyze it that way. But qualitative approaches are also very important in my field, I would say.
And if we just go really high level right now through all of your research, first of all, is attraction a thing that people can attribute to what they've experienced in the past? Or can people find attraction with people that they haven't exactly met yet? So what I mean by this is when we say, oh, I'm attracted to this person, is it because it's based on our history or actually based on some sort of chemistry?
It's a good question. Certainly, it's very easy for people to experience, I think, something they'd comfortably label attraction. Sometimes we talk about romantic interest. I mean, there's sort of a variety of different, people might talk about infatuation if it's especially strong, but these are the various labels we've used to describe, that feeling that I am into this person and I would like to pursue this and see where this goes, right? That this sort of internal subjective state that you and only you know, right? Mm-hmm. People are very comfortable with the idea that can happen upon first meeting somebody. But what do we call that thing if you haven't actually met the person? What do we call that thing if you're like reading an online dating profile of somebody? Is that the same experience, or is it like anticipated romantic interest, anticipated attraction? When I see that person, I'm sort of making a guess at how I'm going to feel about them. I guess my answer is maybe a little bit unsatisfying, which is that it's probably a little bit of both. I do think people can experience genuine attraction for somebody if you've just looked at their online dating profile or just, corresponded via text or something like that. But I do think that there is some component of that is anticipatory. And that if I told you were never going to get to meet this person face to face, that would change your approach substantially. In terms of what you were hoping to pursue with this person.
So how do people even know in the first place what they're looking for? Like we hear people all the time be like, I have a type. And is that stemmed from society, from their background? Like where does that come from?
Yeah, so people often have very strong opinions and strong ideas about what it is that's going to appeal to them.
Yes.
And these opinions and ideas go by a lot of names. So having a type or not is part of that. Sometimes people also talk about jargony terms that we use in the literature are mate preferences or ideal partner preferences, right? And that's usually about traits, right? It's usually about, I really want somebody who's hot and intelligent and goes scuba diving, right? I mean, you can get very, very specific or very, very broad. Okay. So people form these ideas from a number of different places. Here, I'll just review the possibilities, and I'll try not to let my biases come through about where I think they're
True academic speaking.
Yeah, right. I'm gonna do my best. Okay. So some people would say they're evolved. Okay. So there are species typical preferences that humans have. Others might stress that some are male typical and some are female typical, right? So if you're a man, you're going to sort of be more likely to have, on average, a preference for somebody who is physically attractive than a woman would have. Okay, so these things could be species typical. The word innate is complicated and loaded, but some people would use that word to describe where preferences come from. Other people would say it is basically a stereotype. It's basically a distillation of the average people of your preferred sex that you meet. And you're sort of forming this template of what people of the other sex, if you're heterosexual, tend to have. And so that's what's coming out. Another possibility is that it is something to do with your history of meeting different kinds of people, distilling what are the things that separate the people you like from the people you don't like, and sort of properly calibrating, like, I really have seemed to like the intelligent women I've met more than the unintelligent women, and I seem to have that tendency more than my other male friends, ergo, I must like intelligence more than other people do. Okay, so this is the math, the mental calculus there is a little complex, but people might be doing that. So those are at least three broad possibilities for where people's ideas come from, right? It's innate. People are just telling you what they see around them without any real personal insight, or people are sort of going over their own history and trying to tell you what is especially appealing to them as individuals.
And when we use the word attraction and attractiveness, I just want to clarify that now, because I've said this before and I've heard friends say this too. I find this person attractive, but I'm not attracted to them. Is that a true statement? Can you actually find someone attractive but not be attracted to them?
Yes, certainly. And it makes me wish we had two words. I mean, honestly, it's kind of, when you say attraction, in our nerdy papers, we often like to say things like romantic interest or romantic desire, because the tendency to get confused between attraction and attractiveness is very, very easy. But the word attractiveness is almost always about physical attractiveness, like how hot is this person? I mean, you can be talking about faces, you can talk about body, right? Different components of a person could be physically attractive, but that's usually what we're talking about when we say that. So, the correlation between how physically attractive you think somebody is and whether or not you romantically desire that person, that correlation is like 0.6 or 0.7. That's enormous in social science terms, but it's not determinative. So there are going to be some people that you're like, yeah, that guy's hot, but I'm not into him. I do not desire him. So that can certainly happen.
So you talked about ideal partner preferences. That's kind of like the nerdy term that you use in papers. Do you see like trends of certain qualities popping up? Is it all like physical or is it across the board?
Well, so people, if you ask people to start listing, I mean, they can go on for hundreds and hundreds of traits about things that have occurred to them at some point, like, oh yeah, I really like that attribute. I really like that attribute. If you ask people off the top of your head, start nominating things. Actually, the most common thing that people come up with is sense of humor. But you get attractive, physical attractiveness comes in pretty high. All sorts of attributes related to warmth and trustworthiness are also very popular too. And then you'll get things related to status and money and, sort of other kinds of indicators of the ability to navigate social hierarchies. Again, that's our jargony way of describing where those attributes come from. But people can go on for a very, very long time about the attributes that appeal to them and get in arguments about, you think that attribute's important. I don't really think so. I think it's these other attributes. And I guess I would say, I don't know how useful those arguments are, because it's not totally clear to me how predictive these ideas are that people have about what are the important traits.
Can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah. So here's a thing I do believe about people's personal insights. They would say, I'm more likely to be attracted to somebody who is warm than somebody who is moody. Like, good for you. You nailed it. There
Me too.
are good traits and bad
Stating the
traits.
obvious.
All
Yeah.
right. That's good. But if, Julie, you say that you really want somebody who is intelligent, and you say that you really want somebody who is adventurous, Julie, are you likely to like the intelligent people more than Yue is? And Yue, are you more likely to like the adventurous people more than Julie is? Odds are no. That differentiation between people tends not to be very predictive. In other words, you don't really have unique insights into the attributes that appeal to you especially. So yes, you're able to describe something that's sort of typical of the whole population, right? Sort of like, holding someone's hand is better than a kick in the head. But individual differences in how these traits appeal to people is very hard for people to have good insight into.
And so how does that play into our dating lives? Because I feel like everyone feels like they are so confident in the attributes they're looking for. They're deal breakers and these are must-haves. And now you're basically, I'm mind blown that you're telling us, no, we actually do not know these nuanced attributes that we're looking for.
Right. And what it means is that most of the time that people are spending on online, and I'm thinking about like maybe a little bit more the old timey, like, oh, here's the profile and now like read about me and all these attributes and things. You can spend a lot of time looking at that, but it's a coin flip, essentially, whether or not you're going to like the person that appeals to you on paper more than some random other person who didn't appeal to you on paper that you set aside earlier.
Oh, fascinating.
So that's the challenge, right? Is you can spend a lot of time like fishing through the pile and trying to set up your, perfect weekend of 4 coffee dates. But what if you took 10 minutes and just picked the first 4 that seem remotely reasonable? You might save yourself a lot of time, and it's not clear to me that your outcome that weekend would be any
So
worse.
equal odds, really.
Equal odds. Yeah.
We hear that all the time, though, is like people like something on paper and then it doesn't match up in real life. And we've heard from experts before, too, and we've talked about it on the show, is that innately we don't know what we really want. Like we think we want something, and characteristics, like, for example, someone with the best sense of humor may not actually be the partner that's going to be, really the partner that makes you happy, that's going to be there for you through thick and thin. Like, how do people kind of like get out of their own way with that type of stuff?
Yeah, it's very tricky. And I do think when people get in the mindset of, all right, well, I'm going to keep meeting people until that first coffee date is just a huge mind-blowing hit. You might be at it for a while. And the reality is that isn't really the way that we were meant to date. Like classically speaking, the people that we dated were people that knew for longer period of time, right? People had these social milieus. I mean, even going back to ancestral contexts, right? You were part of a social milieu that was actually pretty small. And these were people that would sort of come in and out of your life, but you would have a chance to get to know them in a context that wasn't so officially romantically evaluative, right? Classically, if you think back to, being in school, you sort of get a chance to know people by chance. Oh, you're assigned to the same group over here in this task, or maybe you go to grandma's for the summer and you meet whoever's down the street or whoever's next door, right? So there's all these sort of chance ways that we have to get to know people gradually over time that allow for a more subtle, gradual filtering of potential options. So the online dating realm is amazing in the sense that it gives you all these options, and hey, you got 4 coffee dates this weekend, but it's a very special and unusual kind of filtering process. And I think it's easy to forget that if you just like lose that whole social milieu mixing component where people are gradually getting to know each other, it can feel like like a job, right? It's like this whole extra job that you have that can be pretty dispiriting at times.
We've talked to another expert too that mentioned like she's a behavioral scientist at Hinge, and she mentioned how dating apps they force you to focus on certain attributes because you can't see if someone's kind or if they're funny or anything. Like you end up focusing on physical traits and, job and status and all that. I guess in your opinion, I'd love to hear from you. Like, how do you let dating apps work for you to mimic more what you were just saying of kind of that natural getting to know someone?
Well, yeah. So here I'm speculating because honestly, it's been a long time since I found myself on a dating app. So I can't really speak to the contemporary trends and what is it really like to use them. So some of this advice might sound absolutely wild too.
Thanks for the caveat. I love it.
Right. So I would imagine that if you were using online dating as a way of broadening social networks, right? As a way of saying, not what coffee dates can I have this weekend that I can leverage into something else, but who seems like the kind of person I might want to meet, and they might know of a party or a get together among a larger group of like-minded people, right? Then maybe that would be something that you could connect to and sort of move from there. So instead of like, trying this dart throw of like, maybe you're the one for me, or maybe you're the one for me, is sort of like use online dating as a way of sort of making social networks move and meld together so you're getting to meet more people. Again, this is all in the pre-dating website age, but that was really sort of where the magic happened in terms of like feeling your social universe expanding. It was when you were like sort of connecting this social group with that social group, and like people are all kind of meeting each other in new ways. I do think that really leaves open the most possibilities. And I think it can be very frustrating and isolating for people if all they have are the online dating opportunities, strictly speaking, where this coffee date is to see where this date goes and nowhere else.
That's a really insightful, I think, piece of advice for how to filter on online dating apps, because it is a way of expanding your mind to beyond romantic interest. Mm-hmm. It's more of who do I see myself hanging out with that I would probably normally wouldn't get to. But once you get to that first date, and we hear this quite a bit too, is I wasn't attracted to this person, or I wasn't as attracted to this person when I met them in real life. Yeah. And what I'm hearing from you is, in some ways, attraction builds over time. Yeah. So a lot of our listeners will ask, well, should I absolutely go on a second date regardless? What would you say to that? Do you think that attraction can build over time, even if you just don't even have an ounce of attraction from that first date?
So this is complicated in many ways, because on the one hand, if you look at relationships that became something, okay, so we know this relationship became long-term or short-term. It was sexual in some way. And you look back at the beginning, you can bank on seeing a trajectory that sort of started middling and went up. Mm-hmm. Okay. So if everybody had a filter of you sort of blow my mind from moment one, most relationships would never have happened. Mm-hmm. However, if you take, instead of relationships that made it, you look at the full pool of people that you've met that you were like a little into, and you watch what happens from moment one, it goes down. So what this tells me is that, you need to go out and meet a lot of people, and most of them, your romantic opinion of them will not stay high over time, but you're kind of waiting out for the few where your opinion will increase. It's a lot of work.
That's a lot of work.
Right.
I want to dive into this even more, but before we do, let's take a quick break to hear from our partners. Spring, a time for new beginnings. But you know what adds an extra spring to my step? Our partners at Via Hemp. Whether you want to get better sleep, ease anxiety, enhance your mood, or just get high, they have something for you, including their best-selling High Love Gummy, which will awaken your senses, increase blood flow, and intensify any sexual experience. A couple of weeks ago, I shared some of my gummies with my cleaner, Lou, who we've also had as a guest on this podcast. Shout out to Lou. The first thing he said to me when he came over today was if he could have more because they were that damn good. Personally, I've been liking their 0 THC products. So whether you're a 2 milligram or a 50 milligram user, Via has something for you. So head to viahemp.com and use the code DATEABLE to receive 15% off and one free sample of their award-winning gummies. 21 plus. That's VIIA hemp.com and use the code DATEABLE at checkout. Please support our show and tell them we sent you. Take your passion and pleasure to a whole new level with High Love from Via Hemp. Are you out there in the dating world searching for that long-term, forever kind of connection? Whether you're riding solo or in a fresh relationship, I've got the perfect podcast just for you. It's none other than Sexology, hosted by the amazing Dr. Nazanin Moali, a psychologist and certified sex therapist. On Sexology, Dr. Moali deep dives into everything about sexual health and relationships, giving you profound insights about the mysteries of love and intimacy, from unraveling emotional bonds to tackling sexual sexual hurdles and boosting your sexual well-being, there's no podcast quite like Sexology. One of my recent favorite episodes was No Question Off Limits, a sex educator tells all. My mind was truly blown. But wherever you start, each episode is jam-packed with incredible strategies and eye-opening insights. And don't forget to catch up on some of the past episodes, such as what it means to be bad in bed, what exactly happens at a sex club, and how to become an expert in sexting. No matter where you start, this podcast will inspire you to view sex and intimacy in a whole new light, guiding you through your relationship journey with confidence. Tune in every Tuesday on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast fix. I mean, I've definitely heard of people that have said, like, my partner initially wasn't who I thought I'd end up with. Or when I was on a dating app, I would have actually passed over my current partner that I'm with because of the way we just jived in real life. I personally think, like, it doesn't need to be fireworks from day one, but there needs to be, like, something there. Like, I think if there's, like, zero, it's hard to go from zero to, like, full blown.
Right. I think that's right. And, people have limited time, right? So, it certainly how into somebody you are at moment one is going to be highly correlated with how you feel about them at moment two and then moment three, right? So, it's going to track, but it can still be going up or down if you give it time to do one or the other. So people, you want to start by pursuing the relationships where you're feeling really good about the person right from the beginning. But that doesn't preclude the possibility that had you given somebody a chance who didn't initially, really blow you away, it would have been well. And this was the thing about sort of the way we used to meet people. And by used to, I mean decades past, but also for those of us who are sort of in professional workforce, now, back when you went to school and were forced to interact with people over and over again, whether you like them or not, is that allowed those trajectories to just sort of happen naturally, right? So you didn't really have a ton of choice about who you got to see on a regular basis. So it's a very different universe when we're given so much choice about whether to interact with somebody again after moment one.
But we kind of need to stay in the current universe because that's what we're working with. So from the stories we've heard of couples meeting IRL, a lot of them started out as friends, or they were part of the same group or club or friend circle. And maybe that attraction wasn't there and eventually that attraction built. My current partner and I had known each other for 5 years before we started dating. He played the long game. I did too.
Right.
But in today's environment, if we're thinking about online dating and we really want to feel that attraction, do you have any observations or hacks on how to speed up the attraction process? Can I make myself attracted to someone a little bit faster?
Here is what I'll sort of channel the collective wisdom of my field. I think what people would say is that there are a couple tools you have at your disposal. The first is make those initial interactions different and memorable. This is actually coming out of the Aziz Ansari book from a few years ago. He talks about like a group of people, a group of friends, they'd always take their first dates to monster truck rallies, right? These were not exactly monster truck rally people, neither the people doing this nor the dates, but that's like pretty memorable and gives people a chance to show more aspects of themselves than the typical coffee drinks kind of date, because you have something else to do and sort of marvel at. So doing things that are unusual or contain some sort of other activity. Now, some folks would even go further and say, yes, and make those activities exciting and novel and arousing. So, bungee jumping, first date, just,
oh my gosh, can't imagine.
Get the, buy 10, get one free card and just make that your first date go-to. Maybe. I do think that mixing it up, keeping it interesting, if you're going to use this sort of like one date and let's see how well we hit it off kind of strategy. What I wish existed was online dating, but like I'm going to meet you, but actually it's because you've got 3 friends in mind, right? So like, I'm sure somebody's done this. That sounds the kind of thing that would be compelling. Now, people who run these sites can now tell me that's a terrible idea for a million reasons. But from a pure empirical psychologist perspective, that's what I'd want to see. People meet each other, but not because I want to date you, because you've got a number of single friends. And
they could end up falling for that person.
Sure,
it's
why
like
not?
less pressure.
Yeah, right.
So okay, so we're in the current world where dating apps are prevalent. I mean, there are ways to meet outside, but I think especially during this year, and it's been even more focused. We are not in a lab. We cannot create the quote unquote perfect partner. How do people like come to terms that someone realistically is not going to meet every ideal partner preference they have? Like, how do they feel like they've still made a good choice?
Well, my guess is that what happens 80 to 90% of the time is that people say, I guess I didn't really like that in the first place because I'm really into this person. And yep, they don't match what I would have told you ahead of time, but oh well. And they move forward. And I would argue that is, in most cases, probably the psychologically healthy thing to do. Mm-hmm. And that when people get very strict or rigid about what it is they're looking for, so much so that they foreclose promising real life options because that person is missing some attribute or, maybe component of their family history or something like that. So they foreclose those options from moving forward. That's the kind of thing that's probably worth doing some self-exploration to try to understand exactly why that is. Are you convinced that this is a way of sort of preventing future strife and pain? And how well can you really predict the future? And, sort of maybe there'd be some self-questioning in that respect. That would be the thing that I would worry about when people get very rigid about, I like you. Yeah, this is going well, but this is not what I said I wanted. That's not to say there aren't like real deal breakers in the world that people have, right? Obvious ones are things like, how do we coordinate our two jobs? And, how do we want to think about kids, right? So these are big deals, but I think it's also very common for people to take surmountable things and transform them in their minds into something insurmountable. And that, I would argue, may not always be the best idea.
Like if you're like, I like blondes and this person's a brunette, it might be, okay, am I being so rigid that I'm afraid to get something real, essentially?
Right. I mean, to make it like a little more, think about like sort of maybe educational background, maybe, the things that you're into doing, right? Like you might desperately love travel, but this is somebody who's kind of a homebody. Like you never imagined being with a partner that you weren't going to travel the world with. But this is going well. What do you do under that circumstance? I do think that it's worth doing some exploration to try to, are there other ways you can sort of satisfy your travel bug, right? Are there other futures you could imagine that are a little less rigid than the one that you've got in your mind?
Interesting. I wasn't even thinking of that example. So I want to go into that a little more, maybe. Like which traits, like in this ideal partner preference, in your opinion, are things that people can fold on and that may not really be a predictor of future happiness versus which ones are maybe like gray areas? Because I could see travel being a gray area potentially.
So honestly, I use the example of sort of job coordination, child coordination, family relevant stuff. But to be honest, there's no good research suggesting that anything is, anything other than a gray area, right? Mm-hmm. Now I'm sort of imposing my own values on it, really, when I say like, well, obviously, if you don't want kids, you do want kids, like that's rigid and you should stick to that. But I actually don't have any sort of broader evidence for that. And part of that is a function of the limited way that we study things. We usually study sort of basic traits, right? So physical attractiveness, intelligence, sense of humor. It's almost always like your opinion.
Right.
All of that stuff is negotiable. Whether there's sort of more lifestyle relevant stuff, Politics would be another obvious one, right? That like, really? Like this stuff is also fungible? Like you could change your mind about that? But I have the intuition that some of these things are very important to stick to, but I actually have no evidence.
Mm-hmm. And in a similar vein, in your research, for the couples who've established some sort of baseline attraction towards each other, have you discovered at what point do they decide that this is it? I'm not going to look any farther. There's no one else better, or they accept the fact that there may be other people who are better, but I'm sticking with this partner.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And it's in some ways like, that's the most interesting moment that comes 2/3 of the way through the romantic comedy, right? That's like, this is when it happens. And like, we are terrible at studying it. We're terrible at studying it because most of the time when we're studying couples, we're bringing in people who are way past that point and they've sort of committed to each other, right? So those are the people that come to labs for our studies. But, we missed all that interesting stuff, right? We missed all the interesting moments about, were there moments along the way where, you almost bailed or the other person almost bailed, or where you got, you broke up and you got back together. These things we tend to miss. What we have seen when you ask people to, again, these are like relationships that made it to a certain point. Now you ask them to go back in time and sort of reconstruct what happened. And there's a long period of time between when people first meet on average and when they actually say like, yep, we are together and we are exclusive and we are sort of moving forward. We are off the market. There is a lot of stuff that happens, right? There's usually, at least, in the modern Western context, there's a lot of sexual stuff that happens prior to that point. Part of that is people sort of figuring out and assessing, like, is this somebody that I'm into? Part of it is about meeting friends, sort of you're dipping your toe in what this other person's life is like to see how it feels and to see like, can you sort of bring the two streams of your lives together in a harmonious way? But we see these success stories when we study couples in retrospect, but that's very different than like, as this is starting to happen, can we predict sort of where this is going to go? And that's, I would argue this is actually one of the great mysteries in the empirical science right now is like, what can we predict before it actually happens? It's actually quite difficult.
So the people that you guys study, the people that are in committed relationships, and you were saying that, some of them might have been attracted enough at the beginning, but maybe they didn't think their partner was the hottest person they ever saw or the most beautiful. Do you find that as the relationship progresses, they start to think of their partner in higher terms? Or are they like, is it that they're just looking at the overall picture, or do they actually start believing that because they've bought into it?
I do think that what happens on average is that people's opinion, again, these are the couples that have made it, and now how did we get to this point? They started feeling more and more positively about this person over time. And whether it was, I got to see what this person is really like, or I got to see how well we fit together, or I got to see things about this person that maybe nobody else has ever really gotten to see. Maybe you saw them in a context that nobody else had seen, or maybe things that now they're sharing with you that they'd never really shared with anybody before. All of these elements start to create, we use the term, unique to refer to the way that sort of two people end up fitting well together, right? So they build a unique relationship or sort of a unique set of expectations and like a little microculture that is specific to their relationship. And so when they grow that successfully, that's where it seems good relationships come from. So it's not about sort of picking the right person from the very beginning, but about building something over the first set of interactions that you have with this person. At least that's where we think good relationships come from.
That's fascinating.
That's really fascinating.
Because that's like the opposite of how online dating works.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right. And it's what it could mean is that you could build a successful relationship with many, many people if you had to, right?
So
if
the one is a myth.
Right. If you had 3 options, you'd make it work with one of them. But now you have 10,000. So you spend a lot of time shopping around.
And with that shopping around, I think one thing that dating apps do is that it makes you feel more attractive than you really are, because it's everybody's profile photos are looking at you. It's like stepping into a bar and 10,000 people, all eyes on you. And you have the choice of saying yes and no to all these different people. Have you found that to be true in your studies, that people may just find, they may think they're more attractive than they really are?
Right.
And that's what's attributing to their unsuccess.
That's interesting.
With online dating.
That's definitely my theory of online dating.
Is that everybody feels... Yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Everyone thinks they're hotter than they are, and then they're looking for someone hotter, and it's a cycle of never finding someone. And I think when you find someone at your quote-unquote level, that's when things fall into place.
Yeah, I do think that there is an easy tendency to get overwhelmed by the wide variety of options and to think like, this feels good, but I wonder if something else could feel even better, where we could click, even more strongly. Now, that's a little different from the matching idea, right? The idea that people get a lofty sense of who they are and they start pursuing people who are in fact, at an even higher level than them. And like that causes this mismatch. That as an idea, I am a bit skeptical of.
Oh, okay.
At least once you start talking about face-to-face interactions and moving forward. And the reason why is that I think we overstate the amount of agreement there is about things like who is desirable and who is hot. People do agree, but it is not all agreement. And in fact, it is very far from perfect agreement. There's a great study. I mean, it's like a 15-year-old study before my time. It's truly fascinating kinds of stats they did. It was very creative. But essentially what they had were a set of online dating profiles and a bunch of raters looking at these photos and rating how hot they were. Okay. And they looked across, 100 of these photos. For how many of these photos did somebody put you in the top half and somebody else put you in the bottom half? And the answer was 95%.
Oh, damn. That's
wow.
a lot.
95% of people, guess what? Somebody's going to think you're awesome and somebody's going to think you're terrible. Okay?
Wow.
It's only 5% of people who, like, everybody agrees, like, you do not have it or you definitely have it.
Wow.
So there is a lot of disagreement out there about who is hot and who is not. And even more dramatic is that as people get to know each other, that goes down even more. Now, I can't make the same numbers, but you can imagine that going to 96, 97, 98, 99%, that, among the people that well, there's actually not great consensus about how good of a catch you are, right? Some people just like hanging out with you, but, they may not exactly be into you, whereas some people are into you or they're secretly into you, right? So that agreement goes down. If agreement goes down, it means all of this, like, you can do better, you're a 6, she's a 9, just it all sort of becomes high school silliness.
That's so fascinating, because I feel like in society there's certain cultural standards, and those actually are different in different places. So I think sometimes I definitely have felt this, like if I'm not this, that's like pinpointed as the cultural, definition of beauty, then people must not feel that way. And you're basically saying like that's just, it's all bullshit in a way.
It is. I would say it is. A little true. Here's another way that I'm fond of putting it. Okay, so I would argue beauty is in the eye of the beholder. In fact, I would argue it's approximately 70% in the eye of the beholder, right? About 30% of the variance is people agreeing. Okay, So if you're talking about context where people are looking at photos or they're meeting you for the first time, they don't really get to know you. Yeah, 30% is going to be agreement, and that can feel like a lot. Right? I mean, yeah, it leaves a lion's share left over, but like you would be able to figure out pretty quickly where you ranked in the hierarchy of things if agreement is at that 30% level. But as people get to know you over the course of weeks and months, it goes down. It was 20%, is 10%. And among people who know each other really well, it's quite small. That, I think, is maybe the distinction, is that, and why people who might not consensually be the most desirable people on paper or when photographed, they can often feel like movie stars among their small cadre of friends and acquaintances. And you know what? That's exactly how it's designed, because that was how we evolved. We evolved to sort of get to know people in these small groups, right? We didn't evolve to like one person gets to dominate all the mates because they're the hottest. Like that's not like, again, like you'll hear that from evolutionary psychologists, but I don't know what species they're describing. It's not what people do, right?
Right.
Not,
if you look around, people, like every person is like, has found someone, right? It's not just like, people that look like celebrities.
Right. People that I think are unattractive when I first meet them, guess what? There's a very good chance that person is going to find a very happy relationship and be great. Or maybe they'll have a relationship and then it'll go badly and they'll break up and they'll get in another relationship. Like, it's all okay.
There's a lid for every pot. That's always the case. But in your studies, again, because I'm just so curious, if you've seen any differences when it comes to attraction based on different genders, based on different age groups, based on different stages in life, are people looking for different things because they're in a certain stage or they're a certain age?
These are good questions. First, I'll talk about sex difference related stuff, and then I'll see if I have anything to add about age specific.
Okay.
But with respect to differences between men and women, there are definitely differences. Sometimes those differences are big differences. And the most obvious glaring difference that you'll find in pretty much any survey is that men are more comfortable with the idea of casual sex, hooking up with somebody they don't really know, doing risky things that might facilitate them hooking up with people they don't really know, right? So these are the things that men are much more likely to do than women. You know, again, it's not like 99% of men will do that and 1% of women, right? It's more modest than that. But that's a sex difference that you can easily see with the naked eye. And so that's also associated with the fact that usually when men and women are first meeting, men tend to be the more amorous one. But as people get to know each other, those sex differences start to wane. You don't see much of a sex difference. For example, if you look at established couples and sort of who is sexually satisfied in that relationship, right? If anything, what you see is that men, when they're meeting people for the first time, tend to be overly optimistic about, oh, she seems super into, right? So men are constantly overestimating how much women are into them.
Interesting.
But they do the opposite in their ongoing relationships. Like they like overcorrect the other way, which is this weird mystery that we don't fully understand. Yeah, they think they're women. They think their girlfriends don't want to have sex with them, and they totally do. So, so a lot of like what we understand about sex differences, I would argue, are about like men and women meeting for the first time.
Right.
And you do see a conflict there. And again, like men are like, hey, whatever. Like, what do I have to lose? And women are a little bit more like, slow down, buddy. But all of that relaxes with time. And when we get stuck in a mode of, oh, we're only ever meeting strangers and we're only ever studying strangers in my field, sex differences can look more dramatic than I think that they really are.
So is there any truth to like that? You hear all the time that women place more emphasis on status, for instance, like a man's job or, their wealth or whatever. And then you hear that men are often gravitating, I'm talking about in heterosexual relationships here, that men are more like looks focused. Is there any truth to that, or is that bogus?
Not really. So, and this is something that we've studied a lot in my lab over the years and decades. So it's definitely true that men and women tell you that, right? So men will consistently say they like attractiveness more than women do, and women will say they like status and money more than men do. Okay. But then if you look at how strongly those traits actually appeal to people, attractiveness is very appealing. Again, it's not perfectly determinative, but it is positively correlated with how desirable somebody's going to be. But that's true for men and women, right? To the same extent. So the correlation between how physically attractive people consensually agree somebody is and how successful they're going to be at, say, speed dating, that correlation is like 0.3, and it's the same for men and women, right?
Interesting.
So it matters, pretty important in the grand grand scheme of things, but it matters the same for men and women. If you look at things like money or earning potential, and again, I too find this somewhat shocking, but it has like a tiny positive effect, but it has the same effect for men and for women.
Mm-hmm.
Now, is that because it's co-varying with different things for men and for women? Maybe women who earn a lot are like really funny, right? And maybe men who earn a lot, they dress really well, right? And so, there's like other things in there that are sort of causing those things to be equal. I mean, I suppose you could be getting things like that, but the sex differences that people report when they describe their ideal partner, going back to some of those mechanisms I mentioned earlier, my hunch is that they're mostly describing stereotypes.
Yeah.
Stereotypes in the form of like, people know that men on average earn more than women. So when women are describing a man, they're describing somebody who earns more than when men describe a woman, right? So I think that is filtering into people's ideals, and that's where some of those sex differences come from. You can actually make the same case about attractiveness, because guess what? On average, women are hotter than men. Everybody agrees. So there's some amount of that that's getting in there, and that's, yes, men and women are different, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you would want to max out different attributes depending on whether you were a man or a woman if you're trying to be successful.
And everyone's perception of what attractiveness means and what wealth means is all different. That's what I'm gathering from this, that it's like, I mean, it's a really good segue to some of the takeaways. It's been a fascinating conversation. Thank you again, Paul, for being here. I mean, my biggest takeaway is, one, everything is in the eye of the beholder. There is no perfect partner. There are no perfect traits. It's what is perfect for you and that person, this unique bond that you two have together. And I think this whole notion of, time, that really stood out to me with this. And I think that might be one of the faults in modern days, that we don't give people enough time. And I think if you're constantly looking for someone quote unquote better, and I hate using that word because it kind of goes back to like, what does better even mean if it's all like relative to each other? You may be single for the rest of your life if your goal is to be in a relationship, because that person doesn't exist. And I think sometimes we have to look at ourselves too. Are we perfect in every way? Absolutely not. I know I'm certainly not. So why would I expect someone to have every ideal characteristic? And again, is that ideal my ideal, or is it a societal ideal?
Yeah. I think that's great. I think thinking about compatibility rather than market value, and thinking about time rather than hitting it off immediately. These are two important things to keep in mind that are underappreciated, I think, by general public, but also, the science gets in a lot of fights about these issues too, because we tend to assume market value and you should know immediately. And I would argue both of those things are vastly overstated.
I think it's undervalued because it takes brain power to think about these things, to think about compatibility. What you've touched upon, Paul, is that we blindly talk about the traits we're looking for because that's what we've been hearing. I think the sense of humor one is such a great case in point, because everybody will say sense of humor is the number one quality they're looking for. And if that were the case, every comedian out there would be like married with 5 wives or 5 husbands, right? Like there would be no single comedians out there, but that's not the case, because we just blindly say sense of humor. Of course, that's what I've been told, and stability and sense of adventure. But what I'm gathering from this conversation is that we have to take inventory of all the traits we're looking for and kind of go through each one and question, is this something I really truly value? Or was this something that I heard as a stereotype and that I just thought that I should put it onto my list? And the list of traits we're looking for really shouldn't be that long to begin with. These should be tied to our core values, and it needs a redo for a lot of us to reevaluate what it is we're really looking for. I also love this idea of dating like we're in a lab. Why can't we have our own attraction labs, going on dates and throwing out different things that you're bringing onto the date just to observe what happens? Is such a great idea, because then it becomes less about putting pressure on that person to be someone that you're impressed by or someone who could be a romantic interest. You're putting the onus on yourself to say, how can I make this date more interesting so I can get the most information from my date and learn the most about myself as well? So we can all date like we're in an attraction lab.
My former advisor went speed dating. This is now almost 20 years ago, and brought a set of cards of different questions to ask. These were questions that like came from the empirical literature. Okay. And there were some that were supposed to build intimacy and some that weren't. And so he would randomly draw them and start talking about them on the dates. Okay. Did the cards actually have that predicted experimental effect? Definitely not. But they were really interesting conversation starter. Mm-hmm. So there are ways of adapting like these different ideas, like you were suggesting. Treat it like a lab, like not the same exact experimental manipulation, but bring in different things to like make it interesting and to make it different, because relationships are a thing that you will have to create. And so you can imagine the ideal dates being where you have the opportunity to try to create something together, as opposed to just one drink, where are you from, and what do you do?
I think we need to stop looking at it as a list of traits. Like I think you said something really fascinating, Paul, of just, is it that someone's well-dressed, or is it like that they have status? Like does that fall into looks? It all kind of merges together. And I almost feel like we need to just start, we've talked about this on the podcast many of times, is it's the feeling that you have with this person, opposed to cherry picking if every last trait is what you're looking for. And you said it here too. It's maybe that isn't really something you needed in the first place, or maybe you start to see it in a different light because it's now hybrid with some other trait.
Mm-hmm. Yep, exactly.
One last question for you. What is the most surprising thing that has come out of the attraction lab for you?
Okay, the most surprising thing. Wait, give me a second. Okay, here's one that continues to be pretty surprising to me, and we continue to wrestle with it in a lot of ways. And it is that, so we talked about this idea that initially people agree about who's hot and who's not, okay, and that matters a lot early, but it starts to wane off. And so then you might assume, well, but that's because other more intimacy producing traits will start to matter more. So, right, initially I'm into the hot guy, but my kind, trustworthy friend, his kindness and his trustworthiness, well, that will start appealing to me more and more over time. So it's like a bad boys win in the beginning, but the nice guys, eventually their kind traits take over. Mm-hmm. I don't think that's true. No. Who you are in terms of your individual differences or how people might consensually rate you, basically all of that stops mattering the more you get to know somebody. Huh. So it is not actually that nice guys win. It's that all guys and women have a chance to develop a relationship where they have an opportunity to be nice. And if they take that opportunity, then the relationship is successful. And if they don't take that opportunity, then the relationship fails. But the niceness that like you possess, it actually doesn't do all that much. And that is a little, again, if there's any like psychologists listening to this, their heads just exploded because I just made them very mad by suggesting that like niceness doesn't really matter, but it matters in the context of your relationship. It matters what your partner thinks. But like other people, he's such a nice, trustworthy guy. He's not going to be a better partner. It's all. None of that really matters.
Love it. Wow, that is so fascinating. Well, you know what does matter is you, Paul. Thank you so much for being on our show. You do matter to us.
That is the nicest outro I've ever received.
And if people want to learn more about your attraction lab and your research, where can they find you?
They can follow me on Twitter. That is probably my largest social media presence. It isn't a lot, but it's at Paul Eastwick. That's where we sort of post our new findings and stuff like that.
Great.
Cool. We'll definitely link that and your website in our show notes.
Absolutely. Cool. And you know what makes you listeners more attractive to us is when you give us 5 stars in Apple Podcast reviews. It is a panty dropper. You can't argue with it. There's 100% consensus here. It is the most attractive thing. And if you can write a little nice note too, it's music to our ears. And we truly appreciate all of your nice reviews that have been coming in recently. Thank you again, Paul, for being on this episode and for sharing all of this knowledge that we can now go home and digest and really think about it for the rest of the day. It's a delight
to be here.
This was so amazing, so fascinating.
We're going to wrap up this episode now. Stay dateable.
And attractive.
And attractive. The Dateable Podcast is part of the Frolic Media Network. Find more podcasts you'll love at frolic.media/podcasts. You can follow us on Instagram at Dateable Podcast and visit dateablepodcast.com for access to all the episodes and our premium programs. Also, make sure to subscribe today if you haven't already on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform so you are the first to get all the latest episodes. And most importantly, stay dateable.
Before you leave this episode, just a reminder to head over to dateablepodcast.com/programs if you want to get in on our Meeting People IRL Masterclass and see what else we have in store.